Today's video is going to be an augmentation evoker guide for Dragonflight. We're going to cover everything for the augmentation evoker from talents to tier sets, rotation, stat priority and consumables. I'll also go over my overall thoughts on the spec at the end of the video. So if this video does help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also subscribe to your boy, but let's crack on with the guide. The new augmentation evoker spec is a completely different take on the regular DPS specs we've seen in World of Warcraft. Instead, it focuses on enhancing the strength of your party through support and utility. In this raid build, we're going to be focusing on maximizing our potential throughput while also making sure we buff our group to the best of our ability. When it comes to class talents, this particular build showcases a significant utility present in the evoker class tree. It picks up talents like Twin Guardian, giving us a beefy absorb shield. We'll also take Zephyr as a massive AoE damage reduction. We'll take our second capstone in Time Spiral, allowing us and our allies to cast our major movement ability even if it's on cooldown. In this version, we're also going to include the new talent called Potent Mana that's come with 10.1.5, and this talent grants us a modest 3% throughput buff to a healer targeted by your source of magic ability. While this setup offers considerable utility, players also have the flexibility to skip less impactful damage talents such as Innate Magic, and also Instinctive Arcana in favor of additional situational utility. That being said, we'll still take the vital DPS talents in the form of Scarlet Adaptation. We're going to pick up Blast Furnace as well as Leaping Flames to buff up our core damaging abilities. Onto the augmentation tree for single target then. We're going to start with Ebb and Might, buffing up our party's primary stat by 10% of our own, and also causing us to deal 10% more damage for 10 seconds. We then come down the left and take Eruption as our main essence spender, and into Ricocheting Pyroclast, buffing up this ability for each enemy struck, up to 150%. Similarly to Devastation, we take Essence Burst on the right, causing our spenders to cost no essence and stacking up to 2 times with essence. Causing our spenders to cost no essence and also stacking up to 2 times with essence attunement. In the middle, we're going to take Breath of Eons, applying temporal wounds to all enemies struck for 10 seconds. These wounds accumulate 15% of the damage dealt by our buffed Ebb and Might friends, and then critically strike the target for that amount of damage. After this, in the middle, Chrono Ward is going to shield our allies for 100% of the damage they deal with temporal wounds. And on the left side, we take our second empowered ability in Upheaval, hurling enemies upwards and dealing volcanic damage, increasing in radius for each empowerment level. We then reduce Eruption's essence cost by 1 with Volcanism. Blistering Scales protects an ally, increasing their armor by 30% of our own, and melee attacks against this shield explode for volcanic damage, so make sure to apply this to your tank. We further beef up this cooldown by taking Molten Blood to apply a shield to the target, increasing in size the lower health the target is. Then to the left, we're going to take Tectonic Locus, increasing Upheaval's damage by 50% to the primary target for some priority damage. Back up to the right side then, we take a Cheat Death in Defy Fate, healing us and allies back up, and this can only occur once every 6 minutes. Another defensive we take is Stretch Time to save us while we use our Breath of Eons. And then we come down to the right and take Spatial Paradox, allowing casting while moving for us and a friendly healer, and also increasing our range by 100% for 10 seconds. In the middle, we take Draconic Attunement, allowing us to choose between a 4% max health buff or a 10% movement speed increase, and then Aspect's Favor underneath is going to activate and buff each attunement when we use Obsidian Scales or Hover. Font of Magic is going to buff up our Empower spells, and will increase our maximum essence with Power Nexus on the right. Essence Burst gets strengthened by the next few talents in Ignition Rush, causing it to reduce the cast time of Eruption, also reducing the cooldown of Upheaval with Accretion. Hoarded Power is going to give Essence Burst a 20% chance not to be consumed, and Momentum Shift down on the left is going to grant us up to 10% intellect whenever we consume an Essence Burst. Prescience is going to be one of our main buffing cooldowns, and it's going to grant an ally 3% crit, as well as a 35% chance to grant Essence Burst. And in our bottom right capstone, Fate Mirror grants the ally a chance for their abilities to echo, dealing 15% of the damage or healing again. Finally, we pick up Time Skip in the middle, giving us a massive CDR for 2 seconds. And down the left, we buff our Fire Breath to deal extra fire damage by players affected by Ebb and Might, as well as gaining Lust after we land from our Breath of Eons with Plot the Future. A lot to take in, I know, but as it's a new spec, I wanted to highlight all of the talents we'll be taking so you guys can understand them better. Moving on to the Mythic Plus build, there are many talents you can play around with in the class talent tree for Mythic Plus, as the Evoker's utility is so vast and useful in different situations. Cauterizing Flame can be useful in a dungeon like Brackenhide Hollow for bleed dispels. Oppressing Roar is a really strong contender for coordinated groups to prolong CC chains, as well as Overawe for raging weeks, and to take Overawe you just drop a point in innate magic. And finally, with this build we'll take Terror of the Skies for a 3-second stun instead of Time Spiral. For the spec specific tree, not a whole lot changes from raiding to Mythic Plus, bar a few talents. Imposing Presence is a vital pickup to reduce our interrupts cooldown by 20 seconds. And then we're also going to take Pupil of Alexstrasza on the right side, causing our Living Flame to cleave on an extra target, and that is going to be your AoE or Mythic Plus build. For Augmentation Evokers, the tier set isn't too complicated as it's first introduced to the game, probably so that players can pick up the spec a lot easier. The 2 set is going to cause your Ebb and Might cast to increase the damage of your Empower spells by 30%, as well as the 4 set causing Ebb and Might to increase your ally's primary stat by another 1% of your own. A very straightforward buff to your main ability as an Augmentation Evoker. At its core, the foundation of Augmentation gameplay revolves around combining damaging abilities and group buffs to maximize the overall damage output of your team. The primary rotation follows a rhythm centered around the 30-second cooldown of Ebb and Might, which we aim to synchronize with the damage output of our allies. By utilizing our Sands of Time passive, we can prolong the duration of Ebb and Might by casting Upheaval and Fire Breath, and every 2 minutes we also have the opportunity to cast Breath of Eons, a powerful group-wide damage amplifier that should be paired with your group's cooldowns. The general rotation for the Augmentation Evoker can be roughly outlined as follows, and note this can also be used as a priority list. You'll start off by precasting and maintaining Prescience on 2 chosen DPS players. Next you'll precast and maintain Blistering Scales on a tank. After this we'll use Ebb and Might, roughly on cooldown. Then we're going to use Fire Breath on cooldown while Ebb and Might is active to extend its duration. The same goes for Upheaval, we're going to use this next on cooldown while Ebb and Might is active, so that we extend its duration. Followed by a Breath of Eons to amplify your group's damage and extend Ebb and Might. Then we'll spend Essence Burst and Essence on Eruption. And finally, we'll generate Essence Burst and fill downtime with Living Flame. For a more advanced opening rotation, you'll need roughly 15 seconds for your pre-pull to get set up, and here's how you'll start. We're going to precast Prescience on a first DPS player, then we'll cast Blistering Scales on the tank. After this, we're going to use Prescience on another DPS once it's off cooldown, into a Tip the Scales, then we're going to cast Ebb and Might, followed by a Living Flame that hits the boss on pull. Then we'll consume our Tip the Scales with Fire Breath, straight into an Upheaval at rank 1 unless you need to increase the radius for cleave. We'll then use Breath of Eons, straight into a time skip. Once completed, we'll reapply Prescience on DPS player 1. Then we're going to cast Eruption, followed by a max rank Fire Breath. We'll continue to cycle Eruption and Living Flame here. Then we refresh Prescience on the DPS player 2. Once it's off cooldown, we'll use Upheaval here. And then from this point on, you will continue to cycle Eruption and Living Flame until roughly 30 seconds into the pull, where you can begin a new Ebb and Might cycle. As always, if you're ever confused if a piece of gear is an upgrade, I would always recommend you to sim your character first. That being said though, Augmentation Evokers really do favour intellect, so generally we'll prioritise our highest eye level pieces. For secondaries, a rough guideline starts with a priority of Mastery, followed by Crit and Haste, and then Versatility as our least favoured secondary stat. Here is a list of enchants that you're going to use on your Augmentation Evoker. You'll apply a Sophic Devotion enchant to your weapon. You'll put Graceful Avoidance on your cloak, Waking Stats on your chest, Devotion of Avoidance on your bracers. You'll put a Frozen Spell Thread on your legs, a Shadowed Belt Clasp on your belt, on your boots Watcher's Loam, and finally on your rings you'll use a Devotion of Mastery. Overall, your best file is going to be the File of Corrupting Rage, though in harder content you may want to run with the File of Tepid Versatility to also provide you with some damage reduction. Elemental Potion of Ultimate Power is going to be your DPS potion of choice, with Refreshing Healing Potion being your best healing potion. For your weapon buff, Augmentation will want to use a Hissing Rune for the Mastery buff, and ideally you'd want to consume a Feast for the Intellect buff, but Deviously Deviled Eggs are a good backup as some personal food. For gems, you'll want to use one Skillful Illimited Diamond as your Primalist gem, and then fill your other gems with Sensized Nelthorite and Keen Nelthorite, but again, I'd always recommend simming. And to add to that, Fractured Nelthorite is even a possibility as you gear your Augmentation Evoker, as a substantial amount of Mastery is required. Augmentation Evokers take on the role of something we've never seen before, a DPS spec that plays to buff up your group instead of just dealing their own damage, and feels really unique for this alone. It's a pretty accessible spec, so new players shouldn't hesitate to pick it up, and can deal some considerable damage throughput through the buffing of yourself and nearby allies. It brings massive amounts of utility, which is going to be especially handy in Mythic Plus, healing allies, buffing them, and being able to control mobs very effectively. And unlike the other Evoker specs, it's actually really tanky, mainly thanks to the Defy Fate talent. It is also one of the most mobile range specs thanks to Hover, so there really isn't much to fault with this spec. It can be difficult to get used to the shorter range DPS playstyle, but once you've got that down, you will be a very respectable addition to your team. But that's all you need to know for the Augmentation Evoker, and that wraps up this guide. If this guide did help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also subscribe to your boy. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.